I want you to imagine that you have been invited to a big party at your apartment complex, condo complex, townhouses, or the neighborhood you live in. And the host tells you that this party is going to take place on a Saturday, and the host gives you the date, but he doesn't give you the time, and you agree to attend this party. He's like, yeah, I will be there for that party. He's like, don't worry, I'm going to send you a text message, and I will let you know when the party starts. You're like, great. And then you realize you have another thing going on that day, and you hope that the party will start at a time where you can do the other thing that you want to do as well, and the party. You're kind of hoping this happens. You're hoping this works out. So the day of the party arrives, and you're not quite sure when it's going to start. So you're getting ready to go to your other thing, and you get a text message from the host, and the host says, "Hey, it's time to party." And you're like, "Oh, man, I got to go to this other thing that I want to do instead." Maybe this other thing is you bought a house, and you want to go look at the house. Or you bought a new car, and you want to go test drive the car, or you want to take it on a drive, or you recently got married, and you got like married things you need to do instead. And so you text your friend who invited you to this party, "Sorry, I can't make it. I've got to do something else." And so you are at the other thing, doing whatever the other thing is, whether it's married things or driving your new car, or taking a look at your new home, and you get a notification on your phone that someone is posting, your friend that invited you to the initial party is posting pictures on Instagram, or it's got tweets on Twitter, or whatever a TikTok is called. It's got one of those things is there. And so you start scrolling through the feed of the party, and you see lots of people have gone to the party. And at first, you don't recognize any of the people on the pictures. And you're like, I don't know this person. Wait a minute. And then you start to realize the woman in the picture with the friend at the party is the woman that's usually down the street with a sign asking for money. You're like, oh, that's a little strange. He doesn't know her. But that's cool that he invited her to that, because, it helps people. And then you're scrolling through, and there's another guy, and you realize, I don't recognize, and then you realize, oh, that's the hearing impaired guy that works at the grocery store. I recognize that guy. And again, you're like, that's weird that he invited these people, but I don't know that he knows. But it's cool that he did that. And on the way home from the thing you were doing, whether it's the married stuff or the new car or inspecting the house that you bought, you decided to kind of drive by. It's easier if you bought a new car, right? Because then your friend won't recognize it. You kind of drive by to see what's going on. And you see there are all kinds of people at this party that you did not expect to see there, that aren't necessarily from the neighborhood. You see that there are people that collect the trash, and there are people that work at the grocery store that don't necessarily live in the neighborhood. And then again, there's like the homeless woman from the street corners there. And they're all enjoying themselves at the party, but you are on the outside of that party. And we're going to pause right there. We're going to come back to that, but I want to go to what Josh read. In this study of the meals of Jesus, this is the last one in Luke that Jesus will be invited to a Pharisee's house to eat at. It's not surprising. If you've been if you've been following along, the other times that Jesus has had meals at Pharisees' houses, he is a terrible dinner guest. People talk, after it was the end of August, I preached about one. Grant Smith was talking to me out in the yard, and he made the point that people often say, hey, if there's a historical person you wanted to eat with, who would it be? And they say, Jesus. And he was like, maybe not Jesus after this story, because he might have some things to say to you. And again, it's true here as well. Jesus has some things to say to these Pharisees. To keep in mind, this is a meal on a Sabbath day, and the Sabbath is important. right? The Sabbath is baked into creation, this idea of rest. God creates everything, and on the seventh day He rests. And then it's there in the Ten Commandments as well. So this is an important thing that the Lord has for us, to take time to rest. And part of that time of rest is devoted to Him. And during this meal, the Pharisees are trying to set a trap for Jesus. They've brought this man in with a dropsy, and they want to see what Jesus is going to do. Because on this day of rest, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law have created all kinds of guidelines and rules that define what is and isn't work, what is and isn't permissible on a Sabbath day. And they want to see what Jesus is going to do. And Jesus does what Jesus does. He springs the trap. And He turns it around and says, okay, guys, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And they remain quiet because they know, Pharisees are always smart. They know the tables have been turned on them. They can't answer, yes, it's okay to do good on the Sabbath, because then they would be breaking their own rules about how you behave on the Sabbath. And they can't say no, because then they're forgetting mercy, which they know is one of those key elements that the Lord wants us to show people. So they remain silent. And in their silence, Jesus is frustrated. He is angry, and He grabs this man, and He heals this man. And in doing so, He shows that mercy that is essential to God's law. But He also keeps pushing the point, because He looks at them as like, you guys are hypocrites. You know as well as I do that if your son or if your donkey or ox fell in a hole on a Sabbath day, you would get them out. And it's important not to forget mercy. But as he kind of tells the story backwards, Luke does, because then Luke tells this section right afterwards where as everyone was coming into the meal, everyone was trying to get the most important seat in the meal. And these were U-shaped meals, and the most important seats were tended to be by the host. So everyone's trying to sit by the host so they can be in the important place and look important. Whether they were or not, they wanted to look important, and they wanted to sit by the important people. And they were reclining there, and Jesus notices this and decides to tell a story about that. Here, tell a story. And so someone comes in to a wedding and decides to sit in the most important place. But that person has to be escorted by the host to the least important place, because that place is for somebody else. And one of the points that he is making in this is, and then someone is taken from that lower seat and moved to the more important seat. And one of the points Jesus is making in this is that we need to not let our pride get ahead of us. This is one of those first is last, last is first stories that Jesus tells, where people want to look important, they want to be out in front, they want to be the people who are first, but in doing that, by letting pride get ahead of humility, you become last in the end. And he continues talking to the host of the actual meal he's in, and he says, hey, next time you have a big luncheon, rather than inviting people who want to sit in these important places, rather than inviting people who, if they sit in these important places, will make you look more important, invite the poor, invite the crippled, invite the lame, and invite the blind, because in doing so, you will be rewarded in the resurrection. And this sounds familiar. This should sound very familiar, because this reflects what Jesus talks about in what we call the Sermon on the Mount, where he talks about storing up treasures in heaven rather than treasures here and now. Because if you're only inviting people who will make you look more important rather than people who won't, you're just storing up something here and now that will fade in the end. Which brings us to the story at the beginning that I started with. But I told you the story backwards. I told you the story from the point of view, we imagined the story from the point of view of someone who had been invited to this meal. Now I want to turn it around like Jesus did and tell the story from the point of view of the host. If you're following along, we're still in Luke 14, but now we've moved to verses 15. Just before Jesus tells this parable, one of the people at the meal yells, "Blessed is the man who will eat at the kingdom of God." And Jesus agrees with that statement. And his parable that he tells agrees with that statement. But the blessing is not going to be on people you expect, that we expect. So this story starts with a host throwing a big banquet. Our imagining started this way. Throws a big banquet, and he tells all the people, hey, there's going to be a big banquet. Be ready for it. My servant will come and tell you when this is going to happen. So on the day of the banquet, he sends his servants out to find the people he initially invited and say, hey, the banquet's ready. Now they knew the banquet is coming. They should have been ready for the banquet, but they've got excuses. Someone bought a new plot of land and can't go to the banquet. He's like, I'm sorry, I can't. I got to check out this land. Someone got a new ox and says, oh, I can't. I gotta go check out the ox that I bought to make sure it's gonna ox right. Someone got married, just got married, and says, I can't. I got to go do some married things. And there are other excuses that he's probably told. And the servant comes back and is like, Master, all these people have these excuses for not coming. And the master is like, fine. Go to the street corners and invite all of those people here. Go out into the streets, go out in the alleys, bring the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Sound familiar? This is the advice that Jesus gave the Pharisee earlier about who to invite. And the servant does that. The servant goes out and finds the blind and the poor and the crippled and the lame in the town, but there's still space for the banquet. So you can imagine how many people refuse to come to this banquet, that there's still space. And so the servant is sent further out into the fields and in the streets to invite everyone in to this banquet, because the host doesn't want to waste what was there, and the host isn't going to leave space for those who were previously invited. And this story is a summary of the warnings that Jesus gives Pharisees in these meals that he has with Pharisees. That they are in danger of missing out on the feast of the kingdom of God. They're in danger. They've been invited to this. And the warning is for us as well. Because we're not necessarily exactly like the Pharisees. But anytime you read about a Pharisee, you should be reading about us and saying, okay, how does this message for me? Lots of things get labeled as Christian or as like a Jesus thing, but only people can be followers of Jesus. And we don't set the rules or the guidelines for who is and isn't a follower of Jesus. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law wanted to do that. They wanted to come in with their own set of preconceived notions and say, these people are in and these people are out. And this extends into the church as well. We see in Acts, and we just read about the letter that the Jerusalem council writes to churches, because there are Pharisees in the church that want to draw these lines. But we don't set the lines. Jesus sets the lines. The Lord sets the lines for who is in and who is out. And if I've learned anything from my journey of faith with Jesus, is that typically it is mercy that he is looking for. And typically Jesus, if you are following Jesus and going where he leads, he's leading you into uncomfortable places. He's leading you to invite the people into your lives to the banquet that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be there. And the importance of mercy, like I said, is the real test, I think, of being a follower of Jesus. When we should not lose sight of that's what Jesus and God really want. Jesus himself tells us the greatest command is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself, to love others as yourself, to show them the same mercy that you want. We also see that we are invited to a great banquet. And a traditional understanding of this passage is that it is an end-time judgment passage, which is one way to read it. But as I was preparing for this morning, it struck me that this is not just an end-time passage. This is a now passage. There are lots of passages that are there and then in the Bible, but this is a here and now as well as a there and then passage. And I think the banquet we are invited to now is this life as a disciple of Jesus. This life as a follower of Jesus is a banquet. We are the ones who are initially invited to that banquet. Most of us grew up going to the church, and we get that initial invite, and we have to be ready to accept it. Because if we decline that invite, the Lord will find people to fill those spaces. Paul writes about Gentiles being grafted in to the vine, that family of God. Acts also shows us that whenever the church tries to keep the good news in one place, it breaks out into other places and gets moved and spread faster than people are necessarily ready for it to go. The Lord is always moving, always pushing out to make sure everyone hears the good news. And that's our job, to be the person that takes that good news out there. So the questions we have for us today are, whose example are you going to follow? Are you going to be like the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, or are you going to be like Jesus? Whose commands are you going to follow? Are you going to follow the commands of Jesus, or the things that other people have painted saying this is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus? And whose banquet are you going to eat at? Are you going to be participating in a meal that's here and now, that's temporary, like the new car or the ox? Those are temporary things. Or are you going to participate in a meal that is eternal? We're going to stand and sing a song in just a moment. And if you are in your place on your journey of faith with Jesus, that baptism is the next step, now is an excellent time to do that as we stand and sing.